What we want to start out with for this portion is to model the window for the cellophane. And the way we'll be doing that is by using a render boolean. We won't actually model out this window. And the reason is because we want to keep this as loose as possible in case I need or you need to do various iterations. So we'll go ahead and start with adding a new item. We'll do mesh and we'll name this window boolean. All right. And with that mesh layer active, let's go ahead and select the pin tool. And I'm going to be using polygon mode for this. So what that will do is we can start by placing two verts, and the third will actually create a quad polygon. The reason it will do that is because we have make quads texture. So we'll just place that over there. And now we go to edge mode, right click, and we're going to scale all these edges so that they perfectly align. So we'll do the horizontal ones on the Y and the vertical ones on the X. All right, so now it is a perfectly squared item. We'll pull this forward a little bit so that way it's just sitting in front of the window by a little distance. Okay, and what I want to do now is grab this one here on the right side and raise it up a little. Okay, and the one on the left, we'll lower this one a touch as well. All right, so we have just a slight angle to it. And now what we want to do is insert a new edge in here. So we'll select these edges here, hit Alt-C for the loop slice tool. And we just want one count. Click in the viewport. I'm using free mode, but we'll probably just use uniform for this. Okay, deactivate the tool so that way it's created, and we'll move this up also just a touch. Now let's hit tab to subdivide the mesh. And what we want to do is sharpen those edges along there. And I'm going to use the same tool, the loop slice tool. So Alt-C on the keyboard. And for this, I actually want to change this to free mode. And we'll change this to about 2% or so. The opposite side as well, 2%. And I want to keep these edges somewhat rounded just like this, but we still need a little more geometry in there. So we'll select these vertical edges here, and we'll place in two loops. So we'll change the count to 2, and we'll make this symmetrical. And we'll just eyeball these in. I want it to be about 15% because I like that soft curve there. We have the geometry we need, and now what we need to do is thicken this. So let's activate the thicken tool. Click in the viewport. And I'm going to hold control to constrain what happens here. And I'm going to drag left and right. And that will actually give it some thickness. And what we want to do is thicken this all the way into the box. Okay. And we're also going to harden those edges up a little bit to avoid any kind of weirdness with the render boolean and the smooth curvature of the subdivided mesh here. We'll also be doing a count of 2 again, and click in the viewport, and we'll just harden those up all the way at 0.5%. All right, so there's that. Now what we need to do to create the render boolean is to add a render boolean item. So in the item list, go to volumes, render boolean, and now under the properties tab, we need to specify what this render boolean is going to use. It says use surface here. We'll tick that. What it actually means is use mesh. It's a little misleading. We'll select our window boolean mesh item. Let's go ahead and go to the render tab. Now we don't have a camera or light. So what we need to do is in the item list, add a camera. And now we'll do a very simple directional light. Hit Shift A in the camera viewport. We can zoom in. We don't have to do anything fancy with the light at the moment, but we will just move it up and out of the way and give it a little bit of rotation. Maybe a little less than that. Okay, so you can see we have our render boolean there. Now what we need to do is model the cellophane itself. So let's go ahead and add another mesh item. Go to add item, mesh. We'll rename that to cellophane. And what we want to do is select our box item, go to polygon mode, and let's activate our box exploded morph that we created in the last set of videos. And what we need to do now is select the polygons on the inside. So we'll just paint select this area right in here. And we'll deselect that one. Actually, let's select those as well. Right in there. We'll go all the way up here. Looks like I selected some I don't want. So I'm going to lasso deselect those. Okay. All right. So we have those. Let's Control C to copy. Go to our cellophane layer. We'll move that on. Don't parent that. We'll move it up. Control V to paste. And it looks like I did select some other polygons. So we'll just delete those. Let's go to the model quads view. Let's make sure that those polygons do in fact cover the area of the window that we want. And it looks like it does. So if we hide the full box, you can see that as long as it's covering up that area there, it won't show any visible edges. Okay, so we'll scale this down a little bit, about 90%. We'll just key that in. All right. Okay. That looks good. All right, now we'll thicken this. We're going to thicken this inward toward the box, not outward. So click in the viewport, and we're going to, if you accidentally change the value, make sure you zero out the offset, or in the case of scale, that it's at 100%. And what we want to do is drag the blue area here. We're going to make this about 1 millimeter thick. So we'll just type in 1 millimeter. Okay, that's about thick enough. It's probably too thick. So we'll go with 750 UM. Okay, and now what we need to do is create an edge loop here. So we'll select 2 polygons around the edge there. Activate the loop slice tool. We're going to put in a 2 count slice, and we're going to have this symmetrical. And we're going to push these to the very edge. Okay, bring that on to 0.5% there, and now we have that where we want it. Activate the move tool. We're going to move this back on the Z by about 200 negative 200 UM. And the reason we're doing that is so the polygons don't reside on the same vertices as the box itself. Okay, so now that we can take a look at this, let's go to the render tab. And what we need to do is make sure that the render boolean is not cutting our cellophane. And to do that, we actually need a material. So we'll go ahead and go back to the model tab here. Select all the polygons of the cellophane by double clicking on it. Hit M to create a material, and we're going to call this cellophane matte. Okay, now in the properties tab for the material, in the shader tree, go to the material itself. And under material arrays, you can make sure that it's not being chopped up by the render boolean. And the way to do that is under clipping and turn off enable surface clipping. So now if we go to the render tab, you can see that surface is exactly where we want it and visible. We do a quick setup on the material itself for transparency. We'll go to the material trans here and set this to about, we'll just say 75% for now. Now that we more or less have the cellophane and the window for the cellophane completed, we should at least do a little UV tweaking on one of our UV maps. So let's go to the cellophane mesh object. And what we do is hide the other objects there, except for the render boolean. We'll select this edge loop here, hit L to continue the loop, shift up to expand that selection there. We're going to move these polygons in the UV view, but first let's turn on tear off. All right, and now we can hit Shift H to hide everything else. And what we're going to do is select these edges in here. And we're going to unwrap those individually. Okay, so let's hit unwrap. We'll do planar on the Z. And that's going to be just fine. Let's hit U to unhide. And now we're going to pack everything. We're going to hit lock stacked because I want these to remain stacked. And we'll do orient, stretch it back. That should be fine. That'll pack everything up. Oh, looks like I had a selection. Let's deselect here. Unwrap again. I'm sorry, not unwrap, but pack again, and we'll keep all the same options. All right, so that's complete. So now we're going to set up our scene, and we'll start with a little scene organization here. First, let's throw in a locator. So we'll use a locator, and what we're going to do is parent all of the mesh items, including the render boolean, to our locator. We're going to call this box loc. Okay. Let's change the name of our camera to render cam. And we'll leave the directional light named as directional light for now. So let's go to our render tab. And what we want to do is set up a simple light, camera, and environment rig here. So under environments in the shader tree, let's go ahead, and it looks like I already had one in here. We'll delete that out. In fact, let's just delete out the environment altogether, and we'll create a new one. Let's go to the render preset browser, and we'll browse to environments. Let's use an indoor light. Let's go ahead and use the kitchen probe. I tend to like that one. And back under environments, what we'll do is tone this down quite a lot. So we'll turn the opacity down to about 20% just to see what it looks like. It's pretty bright, but not too bright. Gives us nice highlights and all sorts of cool stuff. The other thing is that the environment that's in here is a little bright as well. And in fact, I'm not sure I really want that kind of lighting. Let's go ahead and try the physically based one. Yeah, I kind of like that one, but for now, let's just go with two color gradient. And we should probably turn the kitchen probe to, let's try screen or multiply. Kind of like what multiply is doing for us. Let's go back to normal for now. Okay, under the environment material here, let's change the opacity also down to about 20%. All right. That's getting pretty close to what I think I would like. Let's go back to the kitchen probe. One thing we can't forget is that we're also going to have lights in our scene. So we don't want these to be too hot. When I say these, I mean the environment material and the probe that we're using. So let's go mess with our light a little bit. And let's turn down the radiance for that all the way down to 0. And you can see it was a little bright. So we'll kind of tune that in. Let's start with 0.5. Let's go back to our 3D view. Okay, let's move this into place as well. Change our action center to selection. And this doesn't really matter with the directional light all that much, but we might change this light. And when we do that, placement will become quite important. So I'm just trying to get this in line and aiming it at the box itself. All right, so I think the camera and the light are a little too big. So select them both, go to the display tab, and let's change this down to about 0.2. That's a lot better. A lot easier to see. Deselect those. Select our locator as well. Change the scale down to about 0.5. All right. That should do it. Okay, back on with our light. Properties tab. Let's go ahead and change the radiance to 1. Let's try 1.2. All right, it's brightening it up quite a bit. This might be a little early, but I'm going to change the light to an area light. So right click on the light, go to change type, and we're going to select area light. You can see the render preview looks quite a bit better, but it's also taking a lot longer to render. I just want to see what it looks like with an area light, and I really like how area lights look. It gives a nice um, gradient on the lighting. So let's go check out the height of this. Okay. So the light's been rotated. Go to Action Center, Selection, and rotate that. In fact, let's just zero out the Z rotation, just for now. And we can change the height and the width of the light to adjust how this light's fall off is on the surface of the box here. So you can also do that with the scale tool, like so. You see it's drastically changed. We can widen it quite a lot. And that will make the light be very bright over here and taper more this way. It'll also lighten it up a little more over here. Now, if we wanted to have it be a little brighter vertically, we would do the same thing with the vertical size of the light. And I actually really like how bright it is over here and how dark it is on this side. Gives a nice looking gradient. I also like how the environment light is affecting the top of the box. We're getting a nice highlight on the backside here. Now, if you need to adjust the light probe, you can actually select the probe, go to texture locator, and you can adjust the settings here manually, or you can select the probe itself or the locator for the probe, and then hit rotate, and we can actually rotate this around however we want. So say you want that highlight to fall on the front side. That's how you would do that. Well, we already have a light doing that for us, so we can hit undo and move it back to where it was. And I'm going to stick with this for now. I think that's pretty decent looking myself. And what we need to do now is to bring in a couple other things that will affect our lighting. Now, what we have, if we import it, oops, that's another project. Let's go to our current project here. Let's go to objects, and we're going to import a light box. And the light box is going to drastically affect what's happening with the lighting. Okay. So using the render preview here to get a good idea what's going on in our scene. And if you're not already aware, you can move your cursor around the areas where you want to render right now. What we need to do next is position our camera and then leave it be. So lighting is very dependent on camera. And I know I want to come at it from around the angle we almost already have. So if we just position it a little more at a slightly lower angle, okay, we'll zoom in as well. All right, we'll go a little closer. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good right there. Now what we need to do is right click on our camera and lock it. Do not touch that camera. We're also going to do the same thing with the light. We don't want to move that as well. All right. So we might change the light color a little bit later, but for now we're going to leave this as a white. So it's really important that we get our lighting squared away very early. Otherwise, once we start putting in albedo or diffuse color maps, it's possible that we could have some issues. So it's good to get this thing, it's good to get it knocked out. It's good to get the lighting where you want it with the clay model first before doing anything with albedo or diffuse color maps. So one last thing we want to do for this part is to add another camera. So we'll go to add item camera. We're just going to call this one view look cam. Okay, and what this one's going to let us do is move our camera around and get a look at different areas. What this is going to let us do is move around our item and get a better look around to see what's going on with anything we might need to look at from different angles. Okay, so we'll go back to our render camera and change this back to render camera. And what we need to do is clean up our shader tree and to make sure things are a little more organized and easier to follow. The first thing I noticed is that when we imported our lightbox, we also got our lightbox material. And of course, it happened to have its own shader. Right, and that's perfectly fine. Now, one thing I also noticed is that it also had its own um item mask, which we don't really need because I'm fairly certain these polygons have their own poly mask. So what we can do is just drag that group out and then delete the lightbox material there. Keep the lightbox map, but the one that was the master of this one, or the parent, you can get rid of. And it has its own shader, which actually allows us to control that material separate from other items. So, for example, what we could do is turn that item off completely visible to the camera. So now it's not visible to the camera anymore. We could also say, hey, we don't want to receive shadows. Now, this gives us a little more control over what we render out. So if we need to comp something different, for example, the shadows on the ground, we don't really like, we want to control them a little more in Photoshop, this is how you would do it. You'd also have to set up a pass, of course, for the shadows, but we'll cover that a little bit later. So now that we have the lightbox material set up with its own shader, group, and so on, we can move on to the box itself. So what we could do now for pretty much all of the materials for the box, including the cellophane, is to create a group for those. So what we should probably do is deselect them, and then we'll add a new group. Select all of these groups, including the base shader that we had in the scene, and put it under group. And then what we want to do with this new group that we have is to assign it an item. But to do that, and have it affect all of those items we have here, the window boolean, the cellophane, actually probably not the window boolean, but the cellophane and the full box, we need to create a group. So select those two items, go to groups, and create new group. And well, you can see I already have box typed in there. Let's just go ahead and call this box, of course. And we'll use a standard group, and we'll use from selected items. And you can see under this, we have two items, the cellophane and the full box. All right, so now that we have that set up, we can go to the groups in the shader tree, back to the properties tab, texture layers, and set items to box. So now that this shader right here will affect only those items there. For example, we can hide those, but we can still keep our shadows. Okay, so handy little tool there. And if you wanted further control, say for example, the cellophane itself, you could give it its own shader and probably put it above the base shader here for the box itself. Okay, so we can minimize that. And the last thing we want to do is actually delete that base material. We're not using that at all. It's not being applied to anything. And in fact, it could just cause us trouble. So we'll get rid of it now. All right, a little more cleanup. One thing I noticed is that I have a lightbox material duplicate right here inside of my box group. So we'll delete that. It should have absolutely no effect on the other one because the other one is applied to that. All right. So yeah, it has no effect on it. Let's just check with our shader here. So yeah, we're good to go there. I also have a completely useless thing that I used in the past that has no relevance on this scene. It was probably part of the light box that I imported. And I also have a number of materials here that we use to model with. Now, some of these may be completely unused, but we might use some of them. So we're going to keep them all until we know whether or not we're going to use them.